The second hearing showed that Trump began laying the seeds for the deadly violence long before that day, all the way back in April 2020, 7 months before the election, when he began telling his supporters that there would be fraud. Then, on election night, Trump refused to listen to close aides who told him that the election couldn't be called yet because votes were still being counted. Instead, the president went on television and said this.
This is a fraud on the American public. This is an embarrassment to our country. We were getting ready to win this election. Frankly, we did win this election.
And then in the days and months after Biden won the election, Trump insiders, including his attorney general, tried to turn him away from the increasingly outlandish claims of voter fraud.
I told him that the stuff that his people were shoveling out to the public was bull. There was never an indication of interest in what the actual facts were.
He showed no interest in the actual facts. And the big lie also allowed Trump to raise $250 million from small donors with a promise that it would go to an election defense fund, which I should point out did not exist, as Congresswoman Zoe Lofgren laid out.
Throughout the committee's investigation, we found evidence that the Trump campaign and its surrogates misled donors as to where their funds would go and what they would be used for. So not only was there the big lie, there was the big ripoff.
The big lie enabled the big ripoff. The committee is laying out its case on Donald Trump so convincingly that it has renewed focus on whether the Justice Department could criminally charge the former president, something that hasn't ever happened before in American history. Attorney General Merrick Garland said this about whether he was watching the hearings.
I am watching, and I will be watching all the hearings. I can assure you that the January 6th prosecutors are watching all the hearings as well. We are proceeding with full urgency with respect, as I've said many times before, to hold all perpetrators who are criminally responsible for January 6th accountable, regardless of their level, their position, and regardless of whether they were present at the events of January 6th.
Here to break it all down for us, Ryan Riley, Justice reporter for NBC News. So, Ryan, I want to ask you first about an NBC story saying that the Justice Department is considering the implications of possibly criminally charging Donald Trump over January 6th. Barbara McQuaid, legal analyst, put it this way and is quoted as saying that such charges could spark civil unrest and possibly even a civil war. But she says that not charging him could be worse. I mean, what is going into the Justice Department's consideration of whether to criminally charge the former president?
Yeah, I mean, really, the stakes couldn't be any higher in this situation. I do think, what's interesting, if you go back to the time right after January 6th, you had a lot of Republicans standing up and saying, hey, impeachment right away isn't the right way to go. And the implication there sort of with this would properly be handled criminally, right? That there was going to be a criminal investigation into that. And I think what that sort of failed to recognize in the immediate aftermath of January 6th is there's not necessarily an easily usable criminal offense that applies to this conduct. The founders, for all the mistakes they made in the founding of America, actually did create a pretty good, a pretty good mechanism for holding presidents accountable, which was the impeachment process. So it's sort of, in retrospect, interesting that that's what Republicans sort of decided to dismiss right away, because the fact is that going forward with a criminal prosecution of a former president is a very, very complicated matter. And there are just a bunch of issues about what criminal statute you could potentially apply to Trump's behavior, because this is pretty unprecedented what we had in this situation. It's not as though there's, a straight up law in the books that says, hey, a president trying to stay in office is manipulating facts and lying to the American public about what happened during the campaign is in and of itself illegal, right? Like there's nothing that necessarily just is automatically applicable to this very unique and pretty awful situation we saw on January 6th and in its lead up.
Yeah, it's Barbara McQuaid who taught me that there are two federal statutes that are applicable, but prosecutors do have to put the evidence together to apply them to those statutes. It's 1512 and 371 if folks at home are curious. But you, better than anyone, have been following so closely the cases happening in Washington, D.C. and elsewhere around the violence that took place on January 6th at the Capitol. And you're writing a book, Sedition Hunters, which follows the folks who have been catching a lot of the participants using their skills as internet sleuths. So take us through some of your top takeaways from the first two hearings. There was a lot of new video evidence, but was there any that you had never seen before?
You know, there was actually some new video evidence that came out in the first hearing. They have access to all of this video, this closed circuit TV footage from the Capitol, and some of that had never been seen before. There were a couple of body-worn camera clips that certainly haven't been circulated very widely. And of course, they had that compelling footage from the documentarian, much of which had not been seen before. So there definitely were some new scenes there. And it's something that online sleuths have already been using to sort of compile some dossiers against individuals who have already been identified and used to identify new individuals. I'm especially interested in seeing in the future hearings when the committee sort of explains exactly why these individuals did what they did and uses their own words to show the connection between Donald Trump's words and the violent actions that we saw on January 6th. We saw a little bit of a preview in that in the hearing yesterday, as well as the hearing last week. And some of those individuals are on the FBI list, have been identified and not been charged yet. Some of those individuals, are just more on the misdemeanor level, but then there's also people who did violent acts. One of the people featured in the video yesterday has been identified, but has not been arrested yet. And after he did that interview, went on to commit violence by smacking a police officer with a flagpole, as seen on video. So I think that, we could see some of those individuals who were sort of played a starring role in these January 6th committees get charged in the future.
That is fascinating, that little news nugget there. In terms of linking all of the evidence so far back to Donald Trump, it's pretty clear that the committee is making a concerted effort to do that. I mean, how do you read their utilization of the evidence and then taking each and every single piece and linking it directly back to Donald Trump?
I think that what the committee is really focused on is proving this element that would be very, I think, important if the prosecution of Donald Trump was to go forward, which is what was his knowledge, right? And he had been told repeatedly by a number of individuals that this was nonsense. I do think that that's going to play a role in any prosecution which go forward. There's some disagreement on whether or not his actual state of mind, whether he actually believed the lies, how relevant that is, but it certainly would play a role in any prosecution, just getting at his mindset. And I think that bringing out this evidence that Donald Trump was told repeatedly by people in his administration, by people who were actually into the details of these investigations, that this was all nonsense and BS, as William Barr put it, is pretty critical for going forward and just exposing more of that evidence to the public and bringing it out into the public realm and in a usable forum, as this January 6th committee is doing, is a great value to any potential future prosecution.
We only have about one more minute here, but the committee's postponed a hearing to Thursday now, which is supposed to focus on what was happening at the Justice Department with Trump's pressure to claim fraud and try to overturn the elections. And what can you tell us about the delay, if there's any reporting around that, or if that's not even newsworthy, what the committee is anticipated focusing on in Thursday's hearing?
Yeah, what we heard from a member this morning was that, it's basically just a video issue, a capacity issue. The committee had had scheduled 3 hearings for this week. Of course, yesterday we saw an instance where one of the witnesses had to bail out because his wife went into labor. So that sort of caused a little bit of a scramble, I think, for the small video team behind the scenes. So it seems like from what the committee is suggesting, is this was just a capacity issue that they may have, got a little bit ahead of themselves with scheduling that many meetings in 1 week. So one of them is going to be delayed until next week. But I think that, they're going to dominate the conversation, I think, for certainly the rest of this week and next week and into the following week. So all of June is going to be pretty packed with these hearings, and we'll see what the committee unveils on Thursday and then next week.
Living history in real time. Ryan Riley, thank you so much for being here and starting us off. Please stay safe. Hi, I'm Zerlina Maxwell. Thanks for checking out our channel on YouTube. You can see more from Zerlina by clicking any of the videos on this screen, and make sure you subscribe below to stay up to date on the day's biggest stories. Thanks for watching.